are an unusually high number of children laid to rest here. Yet no one in the town seems to recall anything unusual about this time. Yet legend tells a different story, one whose evidence is all around us, etched in stone.
Is it possible that Ellie Kedward from the Blair Witch Project is actually a Wendigo? The story of the Blair Witch has infected the town of Burkittsville, and for very good reason. As a terrifying, oftentimes amorphous being, her goal seems to simply kill or destroy the town at all costs. She has committed heinous acts of murder across the franchise, and is a vile, haggardous creature. But her power set seems to closely compare to the mythical beings known as the Wendigo. And today, brave travelers of the underworld, let's explore the various similarities between a Wendigo and the Blair Witch, and pose the question as to whether or not the Blair Witch might actually be a Wendigo herself. Wendigos are a fairly common story across the world, but have a strong footing in various Native American mythologies. Multiple tribes describe Wendigos as a monster with some human characteristics, or a malevolent spirit that has possessed a person. Since the Blair Witch largely takes place in Burkittsville, Maryland, let's look at the stories from the tribes that are native to that area, such as the Algonquin and the Choptank. The Algonquins in particular describe the Wendigo as a giant with a heart of ice, and in some iterations, it's believed to be made entirely of ice. It's also described as having a deformed skeleton with missing toes and missing lips. Some tribes describe the Wendigo as being larger than human proportions, even as tall as 15 feet in some cases, and most agree that its flesh is ashy and gray. The Wendigo is also believed to have long claws and fangs, with yellow eyes. With that though, the Blair Witch isn't even confirmed to have a physical form whatsoever, and she's appeared several different ways to multiple different victims. She's been depicted as an old woman in all black, a naked woman with thick black hair, other times a woman without a face, and many of the characters do not even know for certain if she floats or walks. The Blair Witch sightings caught on camera, however, seem to almost perfectly line up with the depiction of a Wendigo that we've seen from this region. Although the footage is grainy, we can clearly make out an ashy gray figure of non-human proportions. We can see the lanky limbs and grotesque claws, which look like an almost perfect representation of the Wendigo. Needless to say, her physical form is rather amorphous and nondescript, which is important to take note of, but this could be a result of her possessions. If she is able to invade a person's mind, as she has been shown to do, she might be projecting different images of herself. Cameras, however, don't have a brain and would record the objective reality of what is actually there, hence the footage of the more Wendigo-esque physicality. While the physical description is rather fluid across different stories, what's really important here are the behavioral characteristics that a Wendigo is described to have. The Wendigos are commonly associated with greed and cannibalism. Some tribes believe that a Wendigo would form from a human who resorted to cannibalism, which was become ever more present in the age of colonization. As more and more tribes were removed from their land and forced into the mountains by European settlers, living conditions and food resources became more and more severe. This led directly into a real-world medical condition known as Wendigo psychosis. This was common for people in the Great Lakes and Eastern North American territories, and has documentation leading back hundreds of years. Wendigo psychosis is in essence a desire to cannibalize and a heightened ability to see other people as edible without moral concern. Commonly accompanied by poor appetite and vomiting, native healers have records of this condition dating all the way back to the 1500s. In these conditions, some may have resorted to cannibalizing the dead in order to survive, and some members of the tribe who were afflicted with this psychosis may have given in to their desires. According to their belief system, they would subsequently become a Wendigo if they resorted to cannibalism, an evil spirit possessing them. Others believe a Wendigo would simply possess and mutate a person who displayed signs of severe greed. But the common trait between all of these different tellings from across both these tribes and others is that the Wendigo will consume its victims. Accounts believe the Wendigo would grow larger, and this is what resulted in the 15-foot mutants that we see on record today. In the Blair Witch franchise though, we never outright see the Blair Witch eating any victims, but we do see her dragging them away. If only for the desire to kill, then there would be no reason not to just leave the body there, and the implication is that she is in fact doing something with them. This is the same logic that we used to figure out that the death angels from A Quiet Place couldn't be starved and were not eating their victims. But if you want to hear more about that, be sure to check out our video on the death angels from A Quiet Place. We also know though that the Blair Witch can possess and manipulate brainwashed victims and guide them into doing her bidding. She still possesses the strength to affect the physical environment, but the Wendigo is able to possess people afflicted with greed in many of the native tellings of the creature, with this actually lining up nicely with what we see from the Blair Witch films. The Blair Witch doesn't seem to have much in the way of motive, and instances of her speaking are extremely rare. But instead of talking about what we don't know, what do we know about her motives? We know that she is motivated by vengeance, which we see when she specifically seeks out her accusers in the town and targets them in particular. This tells us she is not running on instinct or primal hunger, but that she has the ability to choose her victims, which is also a common trait of the Wendigo in some iterations. She also chooses the order in which she kills, and even demonstrates mercy in regards to Heather. After Jacob knocks over the cairn in the cemetery, he puts a target on his back. And from here, the witch stalks and torments him before finally ending his life. Heather, on the other hand, reassembled the cairn and showed it some respect, and because of this, the witch left Heather for last. At first glance, the Blair Witch seems to bear a striking resemblance to a Wendigo, both in physicality and in behavior, and based on what we know about the legends of the Wendigo in this reason, this seems entirely plausible. But before we outright confirm that the Blair Witch is a Wendigo, there is one other possibility that we would like to touch on, and that has to do with the actual inspiration of the Blair Witch Project. While the directors didn't outright say that she was based on a Wendigo, we do know that the Blair Witch was inspired heavily by the legend of Moll Dyer. The story of Moll Dyer begins in the late 1600s in Leonardtown, Maryland. It was here that a healer by the name of Moll Dyer often roamed the streets or the woods in search of food or resources. With an influenza outbreak ravaging the city at the turn of the century, however, the scared townsfolk searched for a reason why their beloved town was being ripped apart by illness. The town then accused this likely mentally ill woman of witchcraft and blamed her for the disease spreading across the town. And in turn, they burned down her cabin in the winter of 1698. They violently rioted against her and chased her into the woods, and for 2 days she remained missing until a young shepherd boy found her frozen to a rock. In the coming centuries, the exact location of the rock remained unknown until it was rediscovered in the late 1960s and moved into a museum, but the legend claims that she put a curse on the land before her untimely death. It's even believed that anyone who touches the rock is fated to fall ill or potentially die at the hands of Dyer's curse. There is nothing in the story that ties Moll Dyer to the Wendigo, but we thought this was a compelling alternative to propose to you as well. But of course the answer is one that is not definitive by design, and we may never know truly what the Blair Witch is or who the Blair Witch is. Still though, I would love to hear your interpretation. What do you think the Blair Witch actually is? Do you believe she is a Wendigo or something else? Do the films tell the entire story of the Blair Witch, or is there something more lurking beneath the surface? Thank you so much, my friends, for visiting the channel today, and I hope that you're having a great one.